One.
Hello, and welcome to our town hall, Fighting for Justice in Texas with Senator Sanders and Congressman Beto O'Rourke. I'm Missy Rebick, and I'll be helping to moderate our event today. We've got a great panel lined up for you. Folks who've been doing important work on the ground in Texas, representing a really wide variety of organizations, including the Communication Workers of America, Workers Defense Action Fund, the Texas Organizing Project, JOLT, and the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers. So for those of you who are joining us today in our webinar, I see got lots of people coming in from all over. Go ahead and drop a hello and tell us where you're joining us from in the chat. You can use the feature down at the bottom of your screen and tell us where you're from and where you're joining us from. We've got hello from Erica in Austin, Texas. Lots of Austin. Brian in Austin, Becky in Austin. We've got in El Paso, Jesus Valdez from El Paso. Alan, Corpus Christi. So we've got people joining from all across the state. Thank you so much. Continue to tell us where you're from. We'll try to give a few more shout outs before we get started today. And to those of you all over the country joining us, thank you for tuning in to hear about what's been going on in Texas and how we can continue our fight for justice together. Before we get started, we're going to take a quick look at a short clip produced by Team Bernie, recapping some of the top news from Texas most recently. So let's go ahead and take a look at that video.
Across Texas, healthcare workers are sounding the alarm.
One of the hardest hit states by the resurgent coronavirus after reopening.
The total number of cases here in Texas has increased by 33% over the last 10 days.
Texas set single-day records for increases in COVID-19 deaths and hospitalizations.
The small community on the U.S.-Mexico border is almost entirely Hispanic, a group that is dying from COVID-19 at a higher rate than white Americans.
Hurricane Laura made landfall as a Category 4 storm, ravaging through the southern states of the U.S. Thousands of homes in Texas and Louisiana are submerged in water, and many others are severely damaged.
People are just beginning to assess the full scope of the destruction in Louisiana and Texas, and so far we know of 6 people who were killed, including a 14-year-old girl.
All over the country, folks have been hit hard by the pandemic, and now we're facing natural disasters from wildfires in California and Colorado to the recent hurricanes that hit the Gulf. Today, we're going to hear directly from people in Texas and the challenges Texans are facing during this time, and as importantly, what we can do about it. So welcome to those of you just joining us to our virtual town hall, Fighting for Justice in Texas with Senator Sanders and Congressman Beto O'Rourke. During our program today, you're going to have a moment to ask questions. So you can use your Q&A button down at the bottom of your webinar screen to submit the questions you'd like us to get answered. And we'll do our best to get as many questions answered before we close out the show today. And now let's get started. Our first guest knows firsthand what's going on with thousands of workers across Texas. He's been helping to flip seats red to blue in Texas for years now. Cloud Cummings is the Vice President of District 6 of the Communication Workers of America. Welcome, Cloud Cummings.
Hi, Misty. Thank you so much, and hello to all of you. I'm very happy to be a part of this discussion today. Our town hall today on the fight for justice is about a point of accomplishment and a starting point for so much more that needs to be done. Not too many years ago, a discussion like this in Texas would have been quite different. It would have been more about planning a protest than strategizing for progress. Back before 2010, county after county here in Texas, we were shut out and told to shut up. Union membership was actually on the decline. Well, we didn't shut up, but we didn't just start shouting either. We began organizing, working together, and thinking beyond protest. We began strategizing and planning, not just to be heard, but to win. Union membership is now growing even in the most difficult environments, and workers are fighting back and saying yes to joining unions and saying no to corporate greed. And we did begin winning. Back then, Harris and Dallas counties, the 2 largest counties in Texas, with a combined population of over 7 million people, did not have a single Democrat holding a county office. Dozens of criminal judges, civil judges, county judges, commissioners, and clerks at best ignored us, and on many days were openly hostile to African Americans, Latino, and Asian Americans, who were by far the majorities in those counties. I'm very proud that it did not stand. Specifically, CWA radically changed the way we engaged in politics in Texas. We started with our members by training and developing rank and file members, focusing on creating a deeper working class analysis grounded in building worker power and sharpening our members' critique on corporate capitalism. This led to the expansion of our capacity and our ranks to engage in high-level political work in Texas. Secondly, we knew that in order to change Texas, we had to work with not only labor unions, but also our community allies to give us the best chance for contending for real power in the state. Notice, I said we were intentional about putting ourselves in the progressive ecosystem in a position to contend for real power. Thirdly, we all came together to organize and engage communities of color. We used our minds and our money to mobilize and our voices to get the vote out. Everyone should clearly understand this, that Texas has the most African Americans of any state in the United States. And we have to do everything possible to engage them, register them, and get them out to vote. Today, it is Republicans who don't hold a single office in those two giant counties. The controlling voices of the electorate are voices of African Americans, Latinos, Asians, and fair-minded Anglos voting together and voting in coalition. There is so much discussion about the changing demographics across Texas now. But just like demographics alone did not bring change to our major counties in Texas, demographics alone won't change the statewide either. It is on us to strategize, organize, and mobilize. The scene is set, the timing is right, we need to act. That is why it's so important that we use this meeting today, not to just complain and file grievances, but to plan and organize to win for our people and the voices that go unheard in the Republican Party even. I also have the added honor to introduce Senator Bernie Sanders. It is a pleasure. Bernie Sanders brings toughness every Texan can respect. He brings ideas and bold solutions that have the power to change minds. And there is something else I really like about him. Bernie Sanders scares the daylights out of the low-down, button-down, top-down, sold-out special interests that call the shots in our state. They think they can keep pushing the day of reckoning forever into the future. Bernie Sanders reminds them that they can't. I am honored to introduce the man of ideas, vision, and courage, Senator Bernie Sanders.
Hey, Claude, thank you so much for the introduction, and thank you for the incredible work you're doing in Texas. And let me thank the CWA and the other great unions who are standing up in these difficult times and fighting for working people against, as you have indicated, very, very powerful special interests. I also want to thank Congressman Beto O'Rourke for joining us today, and all of the other great panelists for what I think is going to be a really, really interesting discussion in one of the great states of America. I don't have to tell anybody watching this that we are living in an unprecedented moment in American history. We got a pandemic that has taken 180,000 lives, and many thousands of those lives were taken unnecessarily because we have a president who has turned his back on science and medical knowledge in order to push his right-wing ideology. Today, as a result of the pandemic, we're living under the worst economic conditions since the Great Depression. That's true in Texas, it's true in Vermont, all over this country. And let's not forget for 1 second that millions and millions of people have lost their jobs. And because of our dysfunctional healthcare system, when you lose your job, you lose your healthcare. We're talking about people today who are having trouble feeding their kids, people by the millions worrying about being evicted. So when Donald Trump gets up there and he talks about how great the economy has been and is, we know what he really means. It is great for his billionaire friends. And we got to admit it. Hey, for all the billionaires who are watching this town meeting, I don't think there are too many of them, but if one or two of them are, you know the economy is doing really, really great for you. But if you're a working person who's worried about getting evicted, who can't find a decent job, who's been working for starvation wages, who has no health care, who can't find affordable childcare, maybe sleeping out on the streets, you know that this economy has not been working for you. So what Claude said, and I think all of our panelists are going to say, is pretty simple stuff. And that is, we need an economy, we need a government that works for all of the people, the working people of this country. People can't make it on starvation wages. We can't continue being the only major country on earth not to guarantee health care to all. We cannot continue the massive level of income and wealth inequality that we have today, where three people own more wealth than the bottom half of America. We can and must do better than that. And that is what this program is about today. That is what this campaign is about. It is mobilizing millions of people to stand up, to fight back, to defeat Donald Trump, to elect Joe Biden, and to understand that the day after Joe is elected president, we're going to be mobilizing people all across this country to make sure that he becomes the most progressive president since Franklin Delano Roosevelt. So there is a lot to talk about today. And it is my pleasure to introduce somebody who I've not seen since we were on the campaign trail together, but somebody who, as I think all of the people of Texas know, has run unusual style campaigns. He's a grassroots politician, something that I very much respect. Let me welcome Congressman Beto O'Rourke. Beto?
Bernie, thank you for doing this and for inviting me and for coming to Texas, albeit virtually this time. And as soon as we get this pandemic under control in the Biden administration, we want to welcome you here in person again. You have so many people who love you so much. And I think this is testament to your leadership that you have brought all of us who are on this panel together. And you brought all these people in by the hundreds of thousands onto this live stream to understand what's at stake here in Texas and by extension, the United States. And I think you singularly have the ability to bring so many people out in the most important election of our lives, at least since 1864, in terms of deciding the future and the fate and the fortune of this country. And I've got to think, you know, in historical terms, when the history books are written about this year and this moment in American history, you are going to feature very prominently. Not only are you meeting head on the existential challenge that we have to our democracy and our republic in Donald Trump, but you're also facing squarely the long-standing fundamental structural challenges that might spell the end of the republic if we don't fix them while we still have a chance. And so you have been an inspiration to me and countless millions across this country. Again, grateful that you're doing this and that you've included me here today. One of the things that Senator Sanders has asked me to do is provide an overview of what's happening here in Texas. Well, Misty talked about and introduced a video that showed some of that. We're in the midst of this pandemic, as is much of the country. More than 12,000 of our fellow Texans have lost their lives, so many of them preventably, so many of them predictably, once we stopped following the science and the facts and the truth and the best public health guidance. But this pandemic has not affected all of us equally. It is absolutely decimating Latino communities, decimating African-American families and the families of Native Americans living here in the state of Texas. In the Rio Grande Valley, if you think about communities like McAllen and Brownsville and Starr County, they've run out of space in the morgues and the funeral homes, and they are stacking the dead bodies in refrigerated FEMA trailers right now. These are the communities, 95% Mexican-American, that are bearing the brunt of this pandemic. And it's not by accident, and it does not necessarily have to be our fate. When the Lieutenant Governor of the state of Texas, Republican Dan Patrick, says there are more important things than living, it begs the question, who is he asking to do the dying in Texas, in a state where the minimum wage is still $7.25 an hour? And so many of those workers deemed essential are Black, are Mexican-American, are already struggling to make ends meet with 1 or 2 or maybe 3 jobs, and now have to struggle with their health care, maybe their lives, maybe the lives of their family members. This is what we're up against here in the state of Texas. Bernie also mentioned the economic dynamic of this, the worst recession since the Great Depression. In the first 2 months of this pandemic, twice as many Texans filed for unemployment as did in all of 2019. The lines at our food banks here in El Paso, Texas, stretch 2-3 miles long for people to pick up a box of groceries that they hope will last them through the week. The answer to this, as Claude Cummings spelled out at the top of the program, is making sure that we are mobilized, that we're activated, that we're engaged, that we're registering, that we're voting, and that we're making sure that everyone in our lives, our friends, our family, our classmates, our colleagues, our neighbors, the strangers with whom we engage on social media are also registering to vote and also turning out in record numbers. Because here's what we can do. We saw a preview of this in 2018. Thanks to Claude and Julie Oliver and Antonio and Jose and so many of the great leaders that you're going to hear from today, we helped to produce the largest voter turnout in a midterm in Texas history. And though I did not defeat Ted Cruz, and Bernie, I am sorry about that, we still helped to make some good things happen in Texas. 2 new Democratic members of Congress replaced long-serving Republican incumbents. 12 new members of the state legislature, all Democrats replacing Republicans. And in Harris County, which has more people than the state of Colorado, 17 Black women were elected to judicial positions, literally changing the face of criminal justice in the most diverse city in the United States of America. We have shown that it is possible right here in Texas when we organize, when we mobilize, and when we turn out. And here's what we could win in 2020 if we do that, if everyone on this call does everything that they can. We're only 9 seats down from winning a majority in the state legislature for the first time in 20 years. And in 9 of those seats that we have to pick up, I won more votes than Ted Cruz in 2018. Not only can we do this, in some ways you could say we have done this before. We have extraordinary candidates who are running across the board for these state legislative seats. So many of them women, so many of them women of color, so many of them Black women, first-time candidates who should be in those positions of power and public trust. We have an organization called Powered by People that is literally calling every registered Democratic voter in the state of Texas, in every one of these state legislative districts, to make sure that they turn out and these state legislative candidates have access to the correct phone number, the correct name, and the correct voter to make sure that they win these elections. And if we win that majority, then this state, which has the most suppressive, restrictive, and intimidating voter laws in the country, from the racial gerrymander that has existed as long as Republicans have had power, to the most onerous voter ID laws in the United States of America, to the fact that 750 polling locations have been closed in the state of Texas just in the last 8 years. And I don't have to tell you this, you can probably guess, most of those polling place closures were in the communities with the fastest growing Latino and Black populations in the state of Texas. And then this, y además, in the midst of this pandemic, the deadliest since 1918, for a virus which none of us has immunity for, our state leaders, all Republican white men, will not allow us to vote safely at a distance through the mail, with some very few exceptions, forcing us to vote in person, in some cases, to make the choice between our health, maybe our lives, and our ability to participate in our democracy. Well, this infrastructure of suppression and intimidation can be dismantled with a Democratic majority state legislature. And then this final point, all of this grassroots energy that Bernie was talking about, that Bernie has activated throughout the country, including here in Texas, can not only elect that Democratic majority state legislature, but that energy will flow up the ballot and potentially make Joe Biden the first Democratic nominee since 1976 to win the Electoral College votes of the state of Texas. That, I believe, more than anything else, will spell the end of Donald Trump and Trumpism in America, and will forever reorder the political landscape in this country and make the impossible possible. So that's what's riding right here in Texas with all the great people who are organizing, getting out there, voting, and everyone else beyond the borders of Texas who wants to help us by calling our fellow Texans to make sure that they get out to vote. You can do that with Powered by People, our organization. Now, I get to introduce one of the most exciting candidates across the board throughout the 254 counties of Texas, Jose Garza, who is the Democratic nominee for district attorney in Travis County. Travis County, for those of you not familiar with Texas, is the home of Austin, Texas. And at a moment that this country is trying to figure out the path forward on criminal justice and criminal justice reform, you have an unabashed, bold progressive who just won the Democratic nomination. And I believe, and I hope, and if we all turn out, will become the next district attorney in Travis County, one of the most exciting races in the country today. Ladies and gentlemen, Jose Garza.
Thank you so much, Congressman O'Rourke, and thank you, Senator Sanders. With your help and with your leadership, Texas is in the midst of a political revolution. I'm so humbled and grateful to be here to share this virtual stage with so many of the amazing leaders in the movement of working class people of color, of women, and of young people who are leading the transformation of our state. And this transformation is more necessary now than it has ever been. It's more necessary now because right now, the greatest threat to our public safety is the fact that Donald Trump and Greg Abbott's mismanagement and failures have created the greatest public health crisis in our country and in our state in more than a century. Over 180,000 Americans and over 10,000 Texans have lost their lives. Our economy is in shambles. And in Greg Abbott's Texas, mass incarceration has fueled the spread of the coronavirus. In Greg Abbott's Texas, over 20,000 people in our prisons and over 5,000 working people in our prisons have been infected by the coronavirus, and close to 200 of them have died. And the virus does not stay in our prisons. It moves in and out with people, and that makes all of our communities less safe. But it doesn't have to be this way. We have the power to fix this. I started my career on the Texas-Mexico border as a public defender, both in the state and the federal system. And I saw in those jobs every single day the way that our criminal legal system weighs most heavily on working class people and on people of color. But it has also been the privilege of my career to lead Workers' Defense Project here in Texas. And in that job, I saw every single day the power that regular people have, the power that each and every one of you watching has to change our community and most certainly to fix our broken criminal justice system. So I believe, look, that we could be on the verge of generational, transformational change. This November, we have the opportunity to elect leaders who will strengthen the bargaining power of working people and who believe that healthcare is a human right that should be available to everyone. This November, we have the opportunity to elect leaders who will fix our broken criminal justice system. And not only are those things the right things to do, they will also increase stability in our communities and make our communities more safe. So if you believe as I do, then now is the time to organize, and now is the time to fight. We can do this.
Jose, thank you for that. Great message. And again, folks, one of the most exciting outcomes in an election in Texas so far this year. Keep your eyes on Jose Garza. It's now my pleasure to introduce Tangi Smith, who is a tech support worker for Samsung, but is also an elected board member of TOP, which is the Texas Organizing Project. And Senator Sanders, this is one of the most effective grassroots organizing efforts in the state of Texas, reaching out to low propensity Black and brown voters in our biggest cities and most diverse communities, and really very fundamental to the big turnout that we saw in 2018 and to the turnout that we're going to see in 2020. Tangi leads an effort called Right to Justice, Rock the Vote. Ladies and gentlemen, Tangi Smith.
Good evening, everybody. I'm so happy to be here. And I just want to say, with our organization, Cisen Cuedes, Senator Sanders and Beto O'Rourke, Texas Organizing Project will stand side by side with you in order to get these 9 seats that we need in order to move forward and turn Texas blue. It is our right that we have the things that we need. It is our fight and our struggle every day to live like ordinary citizens. And in certain zip codes in Harris County, those amenities are not given. So this is what Texas Organizing Project is out here for, to stand in unison with organizations across Texas that's going to work to turn our state blue.
Tangi, we're so excited about what you're doing and look forward to helping you in any way that you can, any way that we can. So just reach out to us and tell us what we do. Give us orders and direction, and we will gladly follow. The next speaker that I get to introduce is Antonio Arellano, who is the executive director of JOLT. And Antonio is someone I knew well before he started with JOLT, just one of the most active, energized, and engaging voices in Texas, and certainly on social media, especially making sure that populations of young people, and specifically young Latinos, are heard from and are not taken for granted and are not written off and are not left behind. And he's brought those voices to the forefront of public policy conversations, to our elections, and to this pivotal moment in 2020. So Antonio, looking forward to hearing what you've got to say.
Thank you so much, Congressman O'Rourke, and thank you so much, Senator Sanders, for allowing us this opportunity to have a conversation about the state of Texas. I moved to Texas in 2009, motivated then by the rapidly changing demographics of the Lone Star State and a powerful idea that I might be able to play a small part in building a better, stronger, and more equitable Texas. I've worked now in Houston for a decade, uplifting our youth and empowering our communities of color, because I believe in their potential to not just decide the next presidential election, but to be the driving force behind policy and legislation in our state. You see, Texas is ground zero for change this election cycle, and it is uniquely positioned to lead our nation into a new era of opportunity and prosperity. But in order to do so, we must have the courage to invest in the untapped goldmine that are young Latino voters. We must embrace our powerful diversity and activate our forward-thinking abilities to jumpstart a transition away from a state that has become synonymous with child detention centers and a rotten oil and gas industry. And we can do this by leading the charge on immigration reform and utilizing our mighty wind and solar energy to protect our children and to preserve our planet. At my organization, JOLT, we are on a mission to build a movement of young, proud, progressive Latino leaders to increase voter participation in our state by harnessing the power of our culture and investing in the communities that have been historically under-resourced and underrepresented. You see, with 38 electoral votes, Texas is one of the biggest prizes on election night. Today, there is unprecedented progressive movement in Texas, and it must be met with massive mobilization efforts. Like the great Jim Hightower once said, there is nothing in the middle of the road in Texas, only yellow stripes and dead armadillos. We need progressive champions in Texas, and that's what we're going to deliver in November.
Antonio, I love that you invoked the great Jim Hightower, who is one of my heroes and has been such a staunch supporter of Senator Sanders and the values that Senator Sanders has brought to the forefront across this country and here in Texas. And you and your members in JOLT are just doing an amazing job. Please keep it up. Great example of the grassroots energy that we're seeing in Texas. Okay, our next speaker is Johnny Ramirez. Johnny Ramirez is a construction worker in Houston, but he's also a member of the Workers' Defense Action Fund. So Johnny, looking forward to hearing what you have to say.
Thank you, Beto. Hello, my name is Johnny. I'm an active member at Work Defense. I was one construction worker who helped building the University of Houston Squad dorm project. In April of this year, workers were able to celebrate victory after months of organizing when they reached out a successful settlement after a wage theft complaint. As a construction worker, I'm essential. In Texas, Governor Abbott declared construction an essential industry early on the pandemic without providing for safety measures on the job sites. This has resulted in construction becoming a dominant industry for COVID-19. Latinos and minorities are testing positive for COVID-19, and the government is leaving them behind and not providing support. In Texas, up to 50% of construction workers are also undocumented. Undocumented immigrants don't have a quality for federal or state relief and other basic safety nets. They are asking us to work and be essential workers, but then we're excluded from the relief programs. This is why we demand Texas leadership, Senator John Cornyn and Ted Cruz, do their job and support the HEROES Act now. Working families need direct cash assistance, regardless of their immigration status. COVID-19, testing and treatment, and DACA and TPS recipients need extended work permits and status. We also want to end the wage theft on campus at the University of Houston, and workers need your support by signing all petitions. Check our social media for more information. We can make a powerful change when we organize so the essential workers and those building Texas are not left behind.
Johnny, thank you so much. I really appreciate what you had to say. And I got to tell you, your dog got my dog's attention. She's running around the living room trying to find where the other dog is. But I really appreciate you in personal terms pointing out just who COVID is affecting in Texas. Some folks will labor under the illusion that this is hitting all of us in America equally. It certainly is not. And those who've been deemed essential and frontline, so often Latino, so often African American, so often earning the minimum wage in Texas, $7.25. We need to look out for them, focus on them, elevate them, and again, understand what's at stake in this election. That Democratic majority that we're trying to elect in the state legislature, they can address those issues that you brought up, including the hostility that we're seeing in Texas against immigrants, and specifically undocumented immigrants. So Johnny, thank you. Next, I get to introduce Ben Brennaman, who is a journeyman wireman with the International Brotherhood of Electrical Workers, IBEW, Local 520 in Austin. Ben, looking forward to listening to you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Congressman. I'm glad to be able to go after Johnny. His experience on the construction sites is the same thing we're seeing in Austin. You know, workers here have been going full tilt during this entire pandemic to build Austin at an unprecedented rate. And we were really lucky. In the absence of a state or federal response to the coronavirus, we were able to work with progressive city council and county leaders to craft our own rules for construction safety around the pandemic. Things like requiring hand washing stations, requiring masking, construction site disinfection, and to get those things enforced. But other places haven't been so lucky. Construction sites have continued to be hotspots for infection, and we've lost a lot of good brothers and sisters to the virus. That's why it's unbelievable to me that while workers die, Trump's Occupational Safety and Health Administration has refused to issue temporary rules around COVID safety. We can't take another 4 years of this. Federal agencies run by people who are hostile to their missions. We can't have another 4 years of a National Labor Relations Board that makes it harder for workers to form unions. We can't have a Department of Labor that's taking away workers' overtime, and we certainly can't have an OSHA that refuses to keep workers safe. A construction worker dies every other day in Texas. Just a couple of months ago, we had a member who got caught in an electrical explosion and got third-degree burns on over 50% of his body and was in a medically induced coma for more than a month. And that was entirely preventable. It's not abstract to us. Federal safety enforcement can make the difference between a worker going home to his or her family or not. You know, I've been disappointed with both parties over the years when it comes to workers' rights, but I'm gonna do everything in my power to elect Joe Biden. And I hope you'll all join me. I'm not exaggerating when I say that this could be a matter of life or death. And I want to thank you again for this opportunity.
Ben, I appreciate that. And I got to tell you, I love that you specifically called out that both parties have culpability in what we're seeing in Texas and certainly across the country. Also love that you pointed out that you're voting for Joe Biden. And I think inferred in all that is that doesn't end the work. His election will not solve these issues. Holding him and his administration accountable, and that's the work that has to continue going forward, all of us together, is critical to achieving the solutions to the challenges that you and Johnny, Claude, and others have laid out in a quote unquote right to work state that has made it impossible for workers to have the right to organize, and thus has produced the conditions, workplace safety conditions, minimum wage conditions, paid leave conditions that leave us wanting here in Texas. So Ben, thank you. Our last speaker before we kick this back over to Misty to take your questions is Julie Oliver. And Senator Sanders, Julie Oliver, who's running for Congress, is just one of the great candidates in this country who gets that you've got to go everywhere, listen to everyone, write nobody off, and take no one for granted. She's visiting every single one of her precincts back when she could do that physically. She's now calling into all of those precincts now that we have this pandemic and we have to do this at a distance. She understands grassroots campaigning, has taken not a dime from political action committees, and is running against an entrenched Republican incumbent who is the very picture of privilege and the very picture of somebody who is working with the status quo, the conventional interests against those of the people he should represent and serve. So Julie Oliver, you've got to win this race, and we've all got your back in doing that. Floor is yours.
Thank you, Beto. Thank you, Senator Sanders, and to Jose and all of our panelists today who are fighting for justice and for a better Texas. And I have to say, I learned from the best. You led by example, Beto, so thank you. My name is Julie Oliver, and I'm running to represent and serve Texas's 25th Congressional District. And I want to start by saying that I know that there are millions of our fellow Texans and millions of our fellow Americans who are struggling right now, who are just trying to get by on unemployment, raising their kids, trying to pay their bills, their rent, and facing this pandemic. Texans who have lost family members to COVID. And I want to say that I understand what it means to struggle. I want to talk to you about why I think it's so important that we have people in Congress who understand what that really means, and how I know that we can have a country where every single one of us is afforded the basic necessity of healthcare, a good job, a place to live, and to carry on our lives with dignity. So just very briefly, a little bit about me and why I'm in this fight. I was born really poor in South Oak Cliff in Dallas, and when we were 11, I moved to a tiny town called Ovilla. My mom was a single mom who taught in public schools and then cleaned houses on the weekends so that she could make ends meet. When I was 17 years old, I dropped out of high school. I ran away from home. I lived in abandoned buildings, and then I got pregnant. So I went back home. I re-enrolled my senior year of high school. I remember laboring with about 15 other girls in a labor ward at Parkland Hospital because that's what Medicaid moms went through in Texas. But with the support of my community and with federal assistance, I was able to go to college and then went on to law school with a young family, and I made a career in healthcare finance. And that is why I'm a supporter of Medicare for All, because we can provide healthcare to every single person in this country, bring costs down, and eliminate the concept of medical debt once and for all. Healthcare is the reason I decided to run for Congress. I have a son whom I affectionately call the walking pre-existing condition. And our current congressman has voted to end protections for people with pre-existing conditions over 50 times. And that lit a fire in me, and I knew I had to run to protect my son and the millions of Texans who are just like him. So we can talk about Medicare for All and economic justice, but before I turn it over to Misty for Q&A, I just want to say one more thing. From the suburbs to the countryside to the city, we are united against hate. And we have an administration and a member of Congress and Roger Williams that see that, and it terrifies them. And so they're trying to stoke fear and hatred and violence and make the problem worse. And we refuse to let them. We will not let them keep us divided, pointing fingers at each other while they continue to enrich themselves. And when we're united, there's nothing that we cannot achieve. So Misty, I turn it over to you for Q&A.
Awesome. Thank you. What a powerful panel. And, before we get to Q&A, Tangi, I know you had some other things you wanted to add. So I'm going to turn it to you quickly, and then we'll get to all the questions we're getting from Texans. Tangi, tell us a little bit about yourself and the fight you're in.
Well, good afternoon again. My name is Tangi Smith, but everybody calls me Tangi, and I'm honored to be here today representing my organization, the Texas Organizing Project. I'm basically a proud mother of 4 adult children. I'm proud to be on the board of directors for this organization. That brings me a great pleasure. I'm happy to represent, Latinos and African Americans in this organization. I'm just, thrilled about working for right to justice. You know, Latino people is we just happy to fight. I'm just really really happy about that. But Latino people, so that we can fight for the justice and housing and healthcare and environments and jobs and other placements. There's a lot of things that's down here that needs to be done that's going undone. Education and things like that. And we, the people, we are the power. And we hold the elected officials appointed and accountable to the things that they need to be accountable for. We're here to endorse political power. We endorse candidates who show commitment to fighting for us and with us, like Senator Bernie Sanders and Beto O'Rourke. And we want to turn out the vote for our communities.
Excellent. Okay, thank you, Tangi. Let's get to some questions. We've had lots of folks writing in. So this first question is from Chris Goldsmith of Irving. Chris asks, one of my biggest fears is voter suppression. I'm losing faith in our own postal service. I live alone, so I'll mask up and go to the polls, but I'm concerned for so many others. Simply put, what could we do? What should we do? Senator Sanders, you want to take that one, and then we'll kind of go around?
Well, I think we understand how important this election is and our need to vote, because we have a president who is trying to do everything that he can to deny us that right. And at a time when so many people, and Beto made this point, are nervous about going into a polling booth because they might get sick, maybe they'll die, the alternative obviously is mail-in ballots. And I got to admit, Trump, who lies all of the time, was kind of honest a few weeks ago when he made it clear that one of the reasons he wants to defund the Postal Service is to make it harder for people to utilize mail-in ballots. So I got to tell you that in Congress, we are working overtime to do everything we can to make sure that the Postal Service is adequately funded, that the regulations are in place so that when you get your mail-in ballot and fill it out, it will get to the people it has to get to in a timely manner. This is an enormously important issue. Once again, Trump is trying to destroy the Postal Service because he doesn't want you to vote. And we're going to do everything that we can to reverse that, to protect the Postal Service, to give them the money and the rules they need to do their job. But it's not just the Postal Service. I think Beto was mentioning a minute ago about them trying to eliminate polling stations all across Texas and all across America. These guys think they can win if there is a low voter turnout. That is their strategy. And our strategy is just the opposite. It is to bring millions and millions of people out to vote who maybe in the past did not vote, to have the largest voter turnout in history. And when we do that, Trump is going to be defeated.
That's right. So this is sort of related, and we've been getting this question a lot. I think it's on a lot of people's minds because of what we've been hearing the president say. So this comes from Adrian Clark from Portland, and they are asking, what happens if Trump refuses to concede election results when he loses? Very concerned that he won't leave. Beto, Senator Sanders, do you guys have thoughts on that?
Misty, if I might, I saw that interview, and Senator Sanders is absolutely right. Donald Trump, who lies all the time, has been saying some of the quiet parts out loud that describe exactly what he's going to do, slowing down the mails to reduce the likelihood that we can vote, or in an interview with Chris Wallace of Fox News saying that he might not accept the results of the election. Now, all of us understand it's not up to Donald Trump or any one person in this country as to whether or not the results are accepted in the election. But let's go into this eyes wide open. If this election is close, and even if Joe Biden has lawfully won both the popular vote and the electoral college vote, make no mistake, Donald Trump will do everything he can to try to create chaos and confusion about the results, and then probably seek to invalidate them with his attorney general, both of whom, Donald Trump and William Barr, have talked about mail-in ballots being fraudulent, though we know that the truth is they are not. It is one of the safest, most secure ways of voting, and it is almost completely immune to tampering or fraud. So what's the answer to that? And I think this is part of the reason that Senator Sanders is holding this town hall in Texas today. If Texas's 38 electoral college votes come in for the Democratic nominee for the first time in 44 years, since 1976, I mean, let that sink in for a second, that will send a shockwave through this country. And Donald Trump may not accept the results, but who gives a shit? Because the rest of the country will be forced to. Texas will represent an unambiguous signal that we are to turn the page on Donald Trump and Trumpism and begin the next necessary new chapter for this country. And folks, we can do this. If we were 2.5 down to Ted Cruz in a midterm, which favors Republican turnout over Democratic turnout, imagine what we can do in a presidential election cycle with all these great state house candidates, all these great congressional candidates like Julie Oliver, engaging and enlarging the electorate in the process. I really think this is ours to lose. Last thing, this, because of the question, Adrian, and you're absolutely right to be concerned, Texas is not a wouldn't it be nice, to quote the Beach Boys. It is a must have. We must win this state to ensure the future of this republic and our democracy and the big work that we have ahead. So folks, let's get after it.
We have another question, and this actually comes from one of your former interns, Congressman, Sophia Andritsos. She said, Sophia asked, what advice would you give to students like me who are trying to engage and motivate students who are new or are intimidated by the voting process during the pandemic?
Sophia, I'll start, and I'm happy to kick it to someone else, but Jolt, Antonio's organization, is engaging and registering voters, primarily young Latino voters right now. You can make a huge difference right there. The Texas Democratic Party is doing extraordinary work. They're as strong as they have ever been. There are individual campaigns and candidates like Jose Garza or Julie Oliver who could use your sweat equity in this race. And here's what I've found. Powered by People has made 20 million voter contact attempts. And I'm on every single one of the phone banks that we've had so far. And it is grinding, tough work. There are some wrong numbers, answer machines, folks hang up on you, as well as the nice people who treat you with respect and kindness. But afterwards, after I put in a 2.5-hour shift, I feel so fulfilled. And I feel like I've got agency in the face of this evil and this darkness that we face in the country right now. So if you are tempted to despair, if you're wondering what role you have in the future of this country, get after it, volunteer for one of these great campaigns or organizations, and it will give you the purpose that you want to have. And then on the night of November 3rd, there's no looking back, wondering what more you could have done. You will know that you did everything within your power while you still had the time to do so.
If I could, Misty, let me just add to Beto's remarks and to tell Sophia that her generation is obviously the future of our country and future of the world. And the good news is that they are the most progressive generation, young generation in the history of this country. It's a generation that is anti-racist, anti-sexist, anti-homophobia, anti-xenophobia, anti-religious bigotry. It's a generation that cares very, very strongly about climate change and understands that their generation, everything being equal until we turn this around, is going to have a lower standard of living than their parents, which is wrong. So, Sophia, your generation and the young people of this country hold the future of the nation in your hands. The good news is that you're a progressive generation, but the bad news is that you don't vote at the levels that you should. If young people voted at the same percentages as people over 60 voted, we would transform this country. So please, Sophia, talk to your friends and your fellow students, your co-workers, and make them understand that the future of this country, and because we're the most powerful nation on earth, the future of the world depends upon who is the next president. And together, we can and must defeat Trump.
Antonio, do you want to add what you're doing to help young people and make it easier to vote during the pandemic?
Yeah, thank you so much, Misty. And Sophia, great question. And I think that, Senator Sanders and Congressman O'Rourke hit it on the head here when we're talking about the largest eligible voting bloc in Texas is young millennial voters. And here in Texas, those millennial voters are brown and black, and they're mobilizing like never before. It really is on us, Sophia, you and your friends, our network, to activate ourselves in unprecedented ways. At Jolt, we recognize that we are being tested by this global pandemic. So we're launching virtual volunteer hours. I encourage you to join us for our virtual volunteer hours happening every week, where we're creating public pressure campaigns to address voter suppression, like the lack of online voter registration in Texas. And we know that we have to mobilize a digital generation, but the state does not allow our digital generation to go online and register to vote. We're also making sure that we're activating our Tres por Tres campaign, which means we don't need you just to vote. We need you and 3 more of your friends and 3 more of their friends to vote. So encouraging us to continue to expand this electorate. The next chapter of Texas history will be written by you, Sophia. So make sure that you get involved and don't be afraid. It's important to make a plan. Early voting starts October 13. Recognize that there's obviously social distancing norms in place, but if you can go out and vote, it is more imperative now than ever before.
Tres por tres, I love that. We used vote tripling is what we call it during the Bernie 2020 campaign. Relational organizing is super effective. So getting your friends out to vote, and you're the best one to do it. This question comes from Dylan Ebbs in Austin for you, Julie. Dylan asks, my question is for Julie Oliver. As a congresswoman, what would you do to protect and expand the rights of people with disabilities?
Oh my goodness, what a fabulous question. I think we have to, one of the first things I want to do in Congress is co-sponsor the Medicare for All bill. And this really should never have been an issue of folks not having healthcare coverage in America. It should never been tethered to employment. But for folks with disabilities, we need to actually probably expand the American with Disabilities Act and ensure that we have folks in Congress and we have administrative departments that are enforcing the American with Disabilities Act, ensuring that we have and unfortunately we don't have it today, but somebody doing sign language when you have virtual events like this, readers for folks who are blind, ensuring that students, I'll say that my son who has had a bunch of healthcare issues used the American with Disabilities Act in high school because he missed 2 years of high school due to his illness. And so ensuring that we make accommodations for folks with disabilities is one of the best things that we can do for the community. But again, also ensuring that everybody has healthcare coverage with Medicare for All. So that in Texas, and for folks who don't know this, in Texas, a very small population qualifies for Medicaid. One of the populations that qualify for Medicaid is folks with disabilities. So Medicaid in Texas has been handed over to private industry. We have managed Medicaid now, and we know that they limit their services so that they can make more money. To Medicare for All, that goes away. What a great question. Thank you, Dylan.
And on the same subject, we've had a few folks write in about this. This one is from Juan Benitez from Austin asking, how do we ensure everyone, regardless of immigration status, has access to healthcare, especially during the worst public health crisis of our lifetimes? Senator Sanders, I think you know of a policy on that one.
I do. Juan, when we talk about healthcare as a human right, that means a right for all people in this country, and especially during this pandemic when we're trying to combat a very, very contagious virus. How brilliant is it to say to somebody who has the coronavirus, you can't go to see a doctor, and yet you're going to spread it all over your community? that is basically insane. And picking up on Julie's point a moment ago, I want everybody to know this. When those of us talk about Medicare for all, and our opponents say this is a radical extremist idea, please understand that every other major country on earth guarantees health care to all of their people. And because of the greed of the healthcare industry and the pharmaceutical industry, we end up spending in this country twice as much per person on healthcare as anybody else. And we've got 90 million people today uninsured or underinsured. And we are sometimes paying 10 times more for prescription drugs, same drugs that people in other countries are paying. So what Julie is saying, and what I think everybody on this panel is saying, the time is long overdue that we guarantee healthcare to all, underline all people, regardless of your immigration status, that when you get sick, you have the right to go to any doctor that you want. When you go to the hospital, you can go to any hospital that you want, that we're going to do away with this insanity of half of the bankruptcies in this country are related to medical debt, where 60,000 people die each year because they don't get to a doctor when they should. So the struggle here, like so many other struggles, is to take on powerful special interests. In this case, it's the greed of the healthcare industry, of the pharmaceutical industry. And finally, to say, everybody in this country, old or young, regardless of your immigration status, will have healthcare. And by the way, we can do that without spending a nickel more than we're currently spending.
To another subject, and I think this would be a great one for you, Congressman O'Rourke, asking, what do you think about starting a federal push for the planned Dallas-Houston high-speed rail in Texas? It would not only be a great convenience for working Texans, but also provide great unionized jobs and good pay and free healthcare.
Yeah, I think Texas has this extraordinary opportunity to take the lead for this country and this country for the world in the fight to confront climate change before it's too late. And I say that because Texas understands this just as well, or maybe better than anyone else. 3 years after Hurricane Harvey, and some of these neighborhoods and certainly homes and businesses still have not been rebuilt. Having just witnessed the devastation of Laura that hit the southeast part of the state and then just tore through Louisiana up through Arkansas, the scientists are very clear on this. These kinds of storms are only becoming more frequent, more intense, and more devastating, dumping more rain, destroying more property, and taking more lives. And we also know this, in this country, and certainly in the state of Texas, the best predictor of your proximity to a polluter is the color of your skin. So much like COVID, this is not hitting all of us equally, climate change. It is hitting some of us much harder than it is hitting others. I think if we elect public leaders in Texas and on the national level who understand this and craft public policy to respond to this, then we may make the most of the window of time that is still open to us, rapidly closing. I mean, this is literally our last best chance. And so, yes, investing in alternatives to single occupancy vehicles like rail and light rail and mass transit makes a ton of sense, all the sense in the world. Rewriting our subdivision codes in our communities to favor walkable communities and ensuring that you don't have to get into an automobile to get to the place that you're going to. Working with our governments to ensure that our utilities are electrifying their grid and using renewable resources to generate the power that we need. Some folks not from Texas might not know this, but we generate more wind power in Texas than does any other state. So you know us for oil and gas, and certainly we have a proud tradition there. But I'd love us to be just as proud of the ingenuity and innovation that can be found here in Texas as we transition away from oil and gas to the high wage, high skill, high value jobs in the renewable energy industry. And again, this stuff's not just going to happen of its own accord. We've got to elect those in the positions of public trust who get it and who will act on it. Julie Oliver, Jose Garza are two examples. And electing a Democratic majority of the state legislature, that's where the rubber meets the road in public policy. I wonder if Senator Sanders would agree, as important as the role of Congress is for the national policy, if you want Texas to take that leading role, we've got to elect those leaders into the state legislature. So that's why this election in 2020 is so critical.
So there's a lot of people asking a very similar question, just really asking for advice on how to talk to their friends and family and colleagues who, don't feel that the vice president might be as progressive as they'd like on certain issues. So some folks have said, I know young progressives who refuse to vote. Any tips on how to talk to these people? Someone else said, let me ask. Go ahead.
Let me jump in there, Misty. Politics, serious politics, is about thinking strategically. And the most important task, for all of the reasons that everybody on this town meeting has stated, the most important thing that we can do at this moment is to defeat Donald Trump. And it's not only because he's a racist and a sexist or a pathological liar or denies the reality of climate change. It is because he is undermining American democracy. And many of the gains that we in the progressive movement have made over the last many years in all kinds of areas will be seriously threatened if Trump is reelected. There is no debate about that. Trump must be defeated. Now, to answer the question, is Joe Biden's views on many issues the same as mine or many of yours? The answer is no. But I want you to consider two things. Number one, take a look at where he has come. We have established with Biden a number of task forces on 6 of the major issues facing this country: healthcare, the economy, education, climate change, immigration reform, criminal justice reform. And I'm not going to tell you that the results of those task forces, the consensus that were reached, are all that I would want. That would not be true. Take a look at what he is talking about, because many of his programs are reasonably progressive. Think about what it will mean to Texas. And Beto made this point. You got a starvation minimum wage of $7.25 an hour. Biden wants to raise that minimum wage to $15 an hour. We heard from some of our brothers in the trade union movement. Biden wants to make it easier for workers to join unions. We no longer want women in America to make 75 cents or 80 cents on the dollar compared to men. Biden wants equal pay for equal work. Biden is prepared to take on the greed of the pharmaceutical industry and make sure that in America, we don't pay the highest prices in the world for prescription drugs. Yes, he does not believe in Medicare for all. I do, passionately. But he is prepared to expand healthcare to millions of people today who don't have it. He is prepared to double funding for community health centers so that people can get the primary health care and the dental care and the mental health care that they need in the communities in which they live. He has some significantly progressive positions on immigration and on criminal justice reform. So take a look at what Biden is talking about. That's number one. Number two, the day after Biden gets elected, together we are going to mobilize people from one end of this country to the other to make sure that he becomes the most progressive president since Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And I've talked to him on a number of occasions, and he tells me that is what he would like to do. But he can't do it without our support. So please, to anybody out there who says, well, yeah, I hate Trump, but Biden is not all that I would like him to be. I understand that. I ran against Biden. Beto ran against Biden. So we know that. But we also know that we have got to defeat Trump, and that the day after Biden is elected, God willing, we're going to do everything that we can to make him the most progressive president that we can.
Misty, could I add one quick thing to this?
Absolutely.
Look, to follow up on the excellent points that Senator Sanders just made, Joe Biden is running on the most progressive platform of a major party nominee in the history of this country. And that has something to do with Joe Biden, but frankly, that has a lot to do with everyone who's on this phone call. The public pressure and engagement that he's responding to from all of you, the leadership on the most critical ideas that this country has ever seen in Senator Bernie Sanders. Again, he's not just confronting the existential threat of this moment, he's been confronting the existential threat to our democracy, to this republic, to working people for his entire career. And so many of those ideas have found a home in this nominee's platform. And if he's elected, and if we all hold him accountable for following through on that, he will preside over the most progressive administration, perhaps in the country's history. He really could have an FDR moment, given the scope and scale of the challenges he faces, if we all do our part right now. And that part extends through and past this election. The other thing that I want to say, and I love the spirit of this question, because the person's asking, what can they do to engage their friends and the people in their lives? And it reminds me of this idea that there's no one coming to save us. There is no cavalry. No one's going to do it for us. We have to be the cavalry. We have to be talking to our friends and family members and neighbors. We have to get on the phones and talk to those voters. On the last phone bank that I did on Thursday night of this week, called a woman named Kelly, who said that she was undecided, and in fact, did not think that she was going to vote in this election. And to the senator's point, she said, I don't know what the difference is between these two candidates. Now, I don't know Kelly's story. Maybe she's working 2 or 3 jobs. Maybe she hasn't had time to engage in this election. Maybe because she's a Black woman and has been marginalized on purpose by law in this state through our democracy, she feels like she's not supposed to participate. But this call from a volunteer brought her back into the conversation, brought her back into this election, brings her back into our democracy. We have to be the cavalry. We have to be making these phone calls and getting engaged in these campaigns. So thanks to the person who asked the question, who's wanting to do that as well. There are so many organizations with whom you can engage to do this. And lastly, and I know we're coming up against the end of this, I want to thank Senator Sanders. Senator Sanders, you were already a hero to me, even more so after today, taking the time to virtually come to Texas and to bring us all together, to bring all these wonderful people out, and to do so in common cause, to face down the greatest threat we've ever known, and also to ensure that this country makes the most of the greatest set of opportunities we have ever faced. And we have the chance to do that uniquely because of you. And so I want to thank you for doing this. Really, really appreciate it.
Well, that's very kind of you, Beto, and thank you for the extraordinary leadership and grassroots organizing that you have done in the great state of Texas. And I just want to pick up on a point that Beto made earlier in this town meeting. And he said that if Biden wins Texas, in essence, no matter what Trump may say, or the confusion that he will try to create, if Texas goes for Biden, and based on what I'm hearing today, you guys have a real shot at doing this, the election is over. So for the folks in Texas, you are a great state. And we started off with Claude Cummings talking about the great work that CWA and the other unions are doing, the victories that you're winning. If Texas goes for Biden, Biden becomes the next president of the United States. And that impacts not only our country, it impacts the entire world. Imagine having a country and a president who not only believes in the reality of climate change, but will work with leaders all over the world trying to transform our energy system. Somebody who actually believes in democracy. Somebody doesn't want to divide us up by the color of our skin or where we were born, but tries, because of his decency, to bring us together. So I just want to thank all of the folks on the panel, and to just tell you in Texas that there is an enormously heavy responsibility on your shoulders. As Texas goes, so will go America in this election. And I know that you guys can do it. And I know that you're taking on all kinds of reaction there. You're taking on folks who don't want you to vote, who are going to put up all kinds of obstacles to your way, trying to divide people up in every conceivable manner. But you can do it. And if Texas does this, the history books of this country will look back and say, thank you, Texas, for saving America.
So we've had incredible panelists today, and I actually had the opportunity to talk to all of you, and there's so much more we could talk about. But out of respect for everybody's time, we really want to talk about what you can do. We've talked about voting. And so I'm actually just going to throw it to Antonio, who's going to make it super clear about what you can do in Texas right now to keep fighting for justice in Texas. So Antonio.
Thank you so much, Misty. Thank you so much, everyone. And the call to action here is clear. We've got to activate ourselves like never before. This moment in history belongs to us. So here's a few dates to keep in mind on our way to November. Number one, Texas voter registration deadline is October 5th. There is only 37 days left to register in Texas. And remember, Texas does not have same-day voter registrations. So you must register by October 5th. Also, you may vote absentee ballot in Texas if you are 65 years or older, if you are disabled, if you will be out of the county on election day or during the early voting period. If you are confined to jail, but otherwise eligible or certified for participation in the address confidentiality program, you can vote absentee. The absentee application deadline is October 23rd. Early voting starts October 13th and runs through the 30th. Make a plan to vote early. In the last primary election, we saw hours long to wait in line. Make sure that you are preparing in advance. Join organizations that are doing day in and day out work on the state. It's not enough just to show up and vote. We need your help to organize every day leading up until November 3rd. Check out the great work that folks are doing on the ground, like Workers' Defense Project, the Texas Organizing Project, Powered by People, and groups like mine at JOLT. Also, like you've heard today from Claude and Ben, if you have a union, you must join your local union. Sign up, pay your dues, get active. We need you in this fight. Be prepared to vote for progressive candidates all the way down the ballot in Texas. Local and statewide elections matter just as much as a presidential election. And to all the young people out there, I know you may think it's easy to just sit this one out, but you can't. You have to show up for progressive candidates, and together we can create a bold, new, and more representative democracy. Jolt is trying to make it as easier than ever before to get involved in this election. We will even mail you your voter registration form right to your home with a pre-stamped envelope. Go to joltinitiative.org/vote to register to vote in Texas right now. Or if you already have, share that link, joltinitiative.org/vote with your friends and family via text and ask them to request their voter registration today. At Jolt, we are building the largest Latino progressive grassroots program in the state to mobilize young brown and black voters, but we need your help to do it. Make sure that you help us, volunteer, join our canvassing efforts. Let's make sure that we bring and build this movement as big as a Lone Star State. I believe that the road to a progressive America runs through the heart of the Lone Star State. And I know it will be young progressive leaders who would transform Texas on November 3rd. And now I would like to thank Senator Sanders for his commitment to the progressive movement in America, and turn it over to you, Senator, to close us out.
Well, Antonio, thank you so much. And let me thank all of the panelists. Let me thank Congressman Beto O'Rourke for not only participating today, but for the extraordinary work that he has done in revitalizing American democracy in general and democracy and participation, people's participation in the state of Texas. You've heard it, not much more than I can add. This is an election you can't sit out. You really can't. If you love your kids, if you love your parents, if you love American democracy, if you're concerned about climate change, if you think that healthcare is a human right, if you think that workers should not earn starvation wages, if you're sick and tired of the systemic racism that exists in this country, or the bigotry toward the immigration community and undocumented people, if you think that you as a young person have the right to get a higher education without going deeply into debt, you can't sit it out, because all of those issues will be determined by who is president, which party controls the US Senate, which party controls the House of Representatives, and who controls the state legislature. So So you can't sit it out. You got to be involved. So I just want to conclude by thanking all of the great panelists. It's been a great panel. Thank you again for the extraordinary grassroots work that you're doing. Let's go forward together. Thank you.